From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Ijoma Onyato.
Hello and welcome. Stakeholders ask House of Representatives to go back to the drawing board as public hearing on controversial infectious diseases bill begins. House of Representatives passes revised 2020 appropriation bill, raising national budget from proposed 10.5 trillion naira to 10.8 trillion naira. National Agency for Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons proposes establishment of special courts to try sexual offenders as both lawmakers and Federal Executive Council vow to take decisive action against rape. And George Floyd's brother asks Congress to stop the pain by ending the killing of African Americans. Plus, we'll have business, sports, news from Abuja, the FCT, and later on news from our studios in London. On business news tonight, Nigeria plans further cuts in oil output to compensate overproduction in May in compliance with OPEC deal.
On sports news tonight, British rivals Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury agree terms for a 2-fight deal.
And from Abuja, death toll from Borno terrorist attack rises to 87. 7 others abducted as 20 persons are feared killed in Faskari local government area of Katsina State.
Go back to the drawing board. That's the conclusion by a cross-section of stakeholders at the opening of a 2-day public hearing on the proposed infectious diseases bill today. The bill is seeking to repeal the Quarantine Act of 2004. It's not the first time the controversial bill is being criticized, but the public hearing today brought together representatives from different strata of the Nigerian society, including state governors, members of civil society, and stakeholders in the health sector. Some of the high points at the session today include, but are not limited to, the need for lawmakers to consider a review of the proposed bill in its entirety, that the proposed bill attempts to usurp the powers of state governors in handling of health-related emergencies in their states, that the proposed bill confers absolute powers on the NCDC Director General to take unilateral decisions, and that the bill infringes on the fundamental human rights of Nigerian citizens. Those contentious points, among others, were on the front burner today. Our correspondent Terry Ikumi reports.
This public hearing was initially not meant to happen. It is what many have described as an afterthought, following widespread condemnation from Nigerians of the infectious diseases bill, sponsored by the Speaker of the House and 2 other lawmakers. While observing the physical distancing protocol, a cross-section of stakeholders have been invited to the public hearing, including state governors and senators.
What we are trying to do here is to set the pace, to set the agenda. Have an act that will guide the activities of the governors on their houses of assembly in having a bill to manage this issue, so that there will be uniformity in handling this issue.
The control of infectious disease bill is but a legislative proposal. It is agreed that it could be an imperfect document, as is the nature of such proposals.
When the bill was introduced on the 28th of April, it was scheduled to be passed through first, second and third reading within an hour, but was opposed by some lawmakers who questioned the powers given to the Director General of the NCDC. That position is shared by the state governors.
This act and the bill, both the Quarantine Act, and even now the bill, gives governors and states very scant operational space to maneuver. And even the limited space that was given in the Quarantine Act is being taken away by this bill that we're currently considering. We think, at the level of governors, that this bill appears to vest overbearing discretionary powers on the Director General of the Nigerian Center for Disease Control.
They have recommendations of their own.
Provisions along the lines of Section 8 of the Quarantine Act should be inserted in the bill to allow state governors and local government chairmen the power to declare a place to be an infectious area and to make regulations so that that power does not just reside in the Director General of NCDC in Abuja. State governments should be given powers to establish state centers for disease control and appoint directors to work with the NCDC as its subnational unit.
Other submissions are also received from invited guests.
We will subscribe to the rejection of this provision, which allows any public officer to subjectively and arbitrarily stigmatize and conduct and conclude that any person has contracted an infectious disease. Even for people to assess and accept Medicare is a matter of choice, and I think these have been tested by our law. So clearly speaking, I think there are fundamental issues that have to do with law and practice and also fundamental right of citizens.
NAFDAC recommends that the administration of the Control of Infectious Diseases Bill be administered by competent authorities, including the Director General, NAFDAC, and other Director General subject to the directive of the Minister.
All the contributions seem to suggest one thing. The intention may be good, but there must be a balance between public health and human rights. And it's back to the drawing board for the House of Representatives. The public hearing continues on Thursday. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, lawmakers in the House of Representatives today passed a revised 2020 budget submitted by President Muhammadu Buhari. A budget of 10.8 trillion naira was passed, showing an increase of 296 billion naira from the 10.5 trillion naira submitted by the president. The budget was revised by the executive due to current realities caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and the drop in oil prices.
24 hours after the Senate stood down consideration of the revised 2020 budget for not capturing the 186 billion naira proposed for the health sector, it has been passed by the House of Representatives. In an exclusive telephone conversation with the Deputy Majority Whip, Nkiruka Onyejocha, she says that the money is captured in the service-wide votes.
And we are appropriate for several bodies.
However, before the House passed the budget, the Speaker explained the need to capture the resident doctors in the budget to avert the planned strike of June 15.
The Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors, they are going on strike on Monday, 15th. They are withdrawing all their doctors from isolation centers and hospitals. We met for about 3 hours. One of their major complaints was the issue of Residents Doctors Act, which is not being implemented. So whatever we do, we need to find their 4 billion in this budget.
In line with their hazard allowances, I hereby move that we add the total allowances running to 4 billion under service-wide vote, which recurrent basis to be recorded under service-wide vote.
An additional 4 billion naira was added to the budget, bringing the total to 10.805 trillion naira. The breakdown shows statutory transfers of 422.8 billion naira, debt service 2.9 trillion naira, recurrent non-debt expenditure 4.9 trillion naira, and capital expenditure of 2.5 trillion naira. It also shows a total capital supplementation of 610.3 billion naira, which captures the COVID-19 intervention fund of 286 billion naira and construction of a National Assembly library at 2 billion naira. Lawmakers say the increase from 10.509 submitted by the president to 10.805 passed by the House will be funded by the loans proposed by President Buhari. Meanwhile, the House also approved the president's request to borrow $5.513 billion externally.
Meanwhile, the Director General of the Budget Office, Mr. Ben Akabweze, says there's a rough road ahead regarding the implementation of the budget as revised by the National Assembly. But he says there are adequate measures put in place by the federal government to fix critical areas such as revenue generation, which has become a major concern. Mr. Akabweze was reacting to the passage of the revised budget on our program, Politics Today.
Being faced with a 3 trillion naira shortfall in our projected revenues, what are the options you have? Option one is that you cut back on expenditure. Option two is that you keep the projected expenditure and look for revenue sources new revenue sources to be able to make up the shortfall, which was coming mostly from declining projections for revenues from the oil sector. But as you know, the oil sector, there's a contagion effect when you have a decline in revenues from oil, which accounts for over 90% of our export earnings, of our foreign exchange earnings. It tends to also drag down other sectors. Trade volumes decline, and when trade volumes decline, customs revenues also decline. And as general transaction volumes decline, your taxes, VAT and other related transaction charges also decline. So the net effect was this 3 trillion. The third option is to sustain your planned expenditures and resort to borrowing.
In the Senate, a critical legislation is being enacted to protect victims of rape against any form of stigmatization. We move on and say that leading the debate on the bill, the sponsor of the legislation, Senator Mohammed Musa, says if passed into law, it'll encourage victims of rape to testify in court and also ensure the reintegration of victims of insurgency into the community of their choice. The bill, which scaled second reading during Wednesday's plenary session, provides for the prosecution and punishment of any person or group of persons who stigmatize such victims.
A rape victim goes to police to report, and the policeman or woman tells the victim to go and sort it out at home, as it is a domestic case. And the consequences of such act is that the victim is left at the mercy of the society without protection. This sort of stigma has prevented many survivors from reporting abuse and seeking justice. Victims of insurgency and other violent acts need this kind of laws that will not only promote gender equality, the empowerment of women and girls as fundamental to all efforts to prevent and address sexual violence in conflict, but can also progressively uplift such victims by making sure that assistance was not subjected to undesirable limitations, such as denial of a normal livelihood, employment, or the provision of sexual and reproductive health care to help survivors in a standardized manner. Part of the objectives of this bill is to provide legal solutions and norms to the serious psychological and traumatic experiences such victims suffered, with a view to help the victims understand and deal better with what they are going through and see themselves equal like all of us.
And still on the issue of rape, the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons is proposing the establishment of special courts in the country to try sexual offenders. The Director General of NAPTIF, Ms. Julie Donley-Oka, explained that the special courts will allow for speedy trial of all persons accused of rape. She's also concerned about the non-adoption of a Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act by state governments.
A victim of abuse remains abused, and the monstrosity of it all is in the rape of minors and babies. This has gone too far. It is the society's responsibility to protect the girl child. There should be prompt reports to convict the culprits, armed with the doctor's confirmation and that of the police, to form the content to be used and convict the culprit. The shame should not be on the victim, but on the culprit. NAPTIP has developed a template of procedural response for victims and their families in the event of crime of rape. Do not take a bath. Do not change your clothes. If the rapist used a condom, collect it for evidence. Please do not destroy. Go to the hospital immediately and ask for a doctor's report. NAPTIP is not unmindful of the pains of the victim at this moment. The agency has set up the VAP units and will work with the National Assembly to upgrade it to a full department.
In part 2, after the break, we'll open up discussions on Democracy Day in the COVID-19 era with a focus on the judiciary, and we'll be joined by a senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Olukayode Enitan. That's coming up in a moment. Do join us again. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Stakeholders ask House of Representatives to go back to the drawing board as public hearing on controversial infectious diseases bill begins. House of Representatives passes revised 2020 appropriation bill, raising national budgets from proposed 10.5 trillion naira to 10.8 trillion naira. National Agency for Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons proposes establishment of special courts to try sexual offenders as both lawmakers and Federal Executive Council vow to take decisive action against rape. And George Floyd's brother asks Congress to stop the pain by ending the killing of African Americans. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or you can download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android, Fire TV, and Roku as well. The federal government has described as embarrassing the upsurge in rape cases, promising to take decisive action against rapists. In addition, the government will also push for the domestication of the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. This decision was taken at the virtual meeting of the Federal Executive Council, presided over by President Muhammadu Buhari. It followed a memo presented to the Council by the Minister for Women Affairs, Pauline Talon.
22-year-old Waila Muzwa raped and killed. 18-year-old Barakat Bello suffered the same fate. The two young women signpost the recent upsurge in cases of rape and other gender-based violence across the country. The criminal act angered women across the country who trooped out to make their voices heard on the matter. That issue was Wednesday tabled before President Muhammadu Buhari, who presided over the Federal Executive Council meeting. When the meeting ended after about 7 hours, there is a definitive stand on the issue of rape.
It got the full support of Mr. President and all members of Council that government will take decisive actions at the highest level to protect women and children within this country.
The council also recalled the laws in place to punish offenders with a promise to push for their domestication and speedy dispensation of justice.
Already we have an existing law, and that is the VAP Act, the Violence Prohibition, Persons Prohibition Act of 2015. That act it covers everything. But our problem is lack of domestication of that act by most of the states. Out of the 36 states, only 9 states have domesticated that act.
Even more serious, according to the minister, is the case of molested minors, a situation she is investigating.
I've put in place a team. A research is going on at all the state levels, while we have the national data collection at the ministry. We are also working closely with NAPTIP to ensure that we find out reasons why a man of 80, 85, 70 will rape a child of 1-2 years.
The council also approves 115 billion naira for road constructions across the country, as well as the revised cost for the completion of the Zungeru-Wushishi water supply project in Niger State. From the presidential villa, Ibrahim Adra, Channels Television News.
2020 will go down in history as the year when the coronavirus disrupted the global economy and social fabric. The pandemic has also cast shadows on the celebration of Nigeria's Democracy Day on June the 12th. Our judiciary correspondent Shola Shoyele reports.
Like many other sectors of the economy, the judiciary is also facing serious disruptions to its services. Despite the national health crisis, many lawyers believe that law should have been declared an essential service, especially since conflicts continue to occur which necessitate a recourse to the courts. One of the cardinal features of a democracy is the rule of law, and even amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the judiciary is taking steps to ensure this principle does not suffer, prompting the CJN and the NJC to approve remote court sittings, which has become the go-to solution for other countries around the world.
One of the revolutionary aspects of the modern judicial attitude across the world is that the rules of the court are meant to ensure that the limited resources of the court and limited time is available to the largest number of people in that time.
The aim is to ensure courts continue to function despite the lockdown and restrictions arising from the COVID-19 challenges. Already, states like Borno, Lagos, Ogun and Katsina have commenced virtual court hearings, while the FCT Abuja High Courts and the Federal High Courts have also issued guidelines and practice directions authorizing judges of the courts to adopt this policy. While many lawyers believe that the country's laws as currently constituted allow for virtual proceedings, there are yet many other judges and lawyers who argue to the contrary. They say that it is unconstitutional. Perhaps to lay the issue to rest, a bill seeking to legalize virtual court hearings by amending relevant sections of the Constitution was introduced at the Senate by the chairman of the Senate Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters, Senator Opeyemi Bamidele. The bill seeks to amend Section 36(3) of the Constitution to specifically include remote or virtual hearings. This move has, however, thrown up another conflict, with some lawyers arguing that the pending amendment has to go through both houses of the National Assembly as well as all 36 state houses of assembly. The Lagos and Ekiti state governments have also approached the Supreme Court to seek an interpretation of the Constitution on virtual court hearings.
The National Assembly's intention to amend the Constitution to include virtual hearing of cases. This presupposes that what has been done already is not constitutional. At least that is our own understanding of it. So that is why we have approached the Apex Court to make a pronouncement on same.
While the nation celebrates democracy, there's still the need for the judiciary to address issues of cybersecurity or video conferencing, as well as the capacity of judges and lawyers to key into technology. It is also important that the judiciary faces the reality of the new normal and invest in relevant ICT infrastructure. Shola Shoyele, Channels Television News.
Now let's discuss this a bit more. I'm being joined on the news at 10 by a senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Olukayode Eniton. Thanks a lot for joining us on the news at 10.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know the hot button issue is the judiciary and technology, but we still need to talk about our democracy and just how you think the judiciary has fared in the last 21 years, looking at administration of justice.
Yeah, it's been a somewhat arduous journey for the judiciary, considering the very terrible circumstances and conditions under which they operate. Now, the Nigerian judiciary is, if not the only one that currently records everything in longhand. The judge sits there. In Lagos State, for instance, each judge on a day, some of them have 30, 40 cases. that they have to do. They have to file returns every quarter. They must deliver, I think, at least 6 judgments a quarter. Now, under what conditions? As at I think this would be about 1993, the Lagos State Judiciary started the implementation of the verbatim recorder thing. And today, that is yet to be fully functional. We still do not have a court where the judge doesn't have to take any note. You cannot get record of proceedings immediately after the sitting. So whilst the judges themselves are doing tremendous hard work, difficult work in difficult circumstances, the system itself, it's not giving them the robust environment that is required. The funding is not there. Their health, the several things are still lacking that the judges require for an effective and efficient work. So how have they done? They've done very well with the things, the tools they have. However, there is still a lot more to be done. But that does not lie in the hands of the judges.
Yeah, you talked about funding as one of the major challenges and bringing it back to the current democracy that we're in.
Yes.
You know, we saw the president there signing that order, granting them financial autonomy, even though that's still an issue that they're trying to debate. Mm-hmm. Is that the kind of reform that we're looking at, just financial autonomy?
Financial autonomy, it doesn't even need the president to do anything. The Constitution already says they are autonomous. The judiciary is distinct in every respect from the legislature, from the executive. Each has its own budget once it's passed. Each one is to get its own direct funding. But what do we have? The executive seeks to still do Father Christmas, or if you're a good boy, I give you something. If you're not a good boy, oh well, I'll come back to you later on. However, the challenge with the executive order, it's not to the extent that it's seeking to implement the constitutional provisions, but it's in the fact that the president himself, in trying to do that, is overreaching. Now, the executive order is giving instructions to officials of the state, not of the federal government now. If the directive were specific as to what should come from the federal budget to NJC then distributes to heads of court. But the moment he begins to attempt to say the Accountant General of the Federation should deduct the allocation of a state from its allocation, deducts what they didn't give to the judiciary in the last budget or at the last round of disbursements, deduct and pay directly to them. He's overreaching himself, and he shouldn't do that. That act itself is unconstitutional. Like the Yoruba says, cutting off the head is not a cure for headache. And this is what the president is doing. He can't do that.
All right. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Olukayode Enito. I wish we had more time to talk more, but thanks for sharing your thoughts with us on the News at 10 tonight.
Thank you very much.
And when the News at 10 returns, Nigeria plans further cut in oil output to compensate overproduction in May in compliance with OPEC deal. That's on Business News. Do join us again. Welcome back to the News at 10. Let's cross over to Abuja now. And here's Ibrahim Adra. Ibrahim.
Many thanks indeed, Ijoma. Let's start from Borno State, where the governor there, Babagana Zulum, have visited the scene of a deadly attack by Boko Haram in Faduma Kolomdi village of Gubio local government area. A survivor in the village of Nomat told Governor Zulum that 81 residents were killed during the attack on Tuesday, with 7 others, including the village head, abducted. While sympathizing with the people, the governor asked the Nigerian military to launch a decisive onslaught that should put an end to the insurgents.
the efforts put so far has paid off, and we will continue to deal with the situation not only in the Northeast but also across the country.
A classic case of the situation fighting back. Because just a few days after this briefing by the Chief of Army Staff on the strides of the army in the Northeast, 81 people have paid the price with their lives. Faduma Kolomdi village in Gubio local government area of Borno State has been torn apart by Boko Haram insurgents who came in sheep clothing.
They gathered us and said they wanted to deliver religious sermon to us. They asked us to submit whatever arm we had. Some villagers gave up their Dane guns, bow, and arrows. The insurgents pretended as if they were not there for any violence.
Animals were not left out in the onslaught. There would have been many more fatalities if these residents hadn't beaten it. But several others were injured. The village head was abducted. The governor has come to see the level of carnage and is appalled at how lives are wasted. After praying with the people, he bears his mind on the way the federal government can address the issue.
Once the tumbus, the shorts of lectures are being cleared completely, then the people will get respite. Anything less than this one is a temporary measure. Military people can come here, can repel them, but the Italian, they may come back.
Steps and alliances have been taken and made by the governments where Boko Haram seems to be laying siege. But something appears missing in the link of the puzzle towards ending the insurgency. Whatever that is, hopefully, the authorities will figure it out as soon as possible and end the attacks on the innocent.
Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari says he has received with deep shock news of the brutal terrorist attack by the Boko Haram in Gubio village of Borno State. A statement from the President's Special Assistant on Media and Publicity, Mr. Garba Shehu, explains that the President Buhari is expecting a detailed briefing by the Governor Babagana Zulum on the outcome of his visit to the affected communities. While condemning the attacks, President Buhari ordered the armed forces to sustain their recent string of successes against the terrorists by extracting a heavy price from the attackers. And in Katsina State in the northwest, the police command has confirmed 20 people feared killed and 26 others injured in attacks on 3 local government areas. But a resident of one of the affected communities who spoke to our correspondent puts the death toll at 54, saying the attacks took place in 6 communities of Faskari, Sabwa and Dandume local government areas. The attacks reportedly happened hours after residents of Pentumaki town in Damusa local government area took to the streets on Tuesday to protest the rising insecurity. Our efforts to tackle the insecurity scourge came up at the Federal Executive Council meeting today with briefings from the Ministers of Interior and that of Police Affairs. The Minister of Interior, Mr. Rauf Aregbesola, who briefed correspondents after the virtual meeting, admits the issue of border management is made difficult by the artificial nature.
As we are increasing our competence and deployment of technology at the air border, we are doing the same at the land border. As I'm talking, we have activated 14 forward operation bases at the land border. As I'm talking. Yes, what we need to do is by far more. But 4 forward operation bases with armed patrol are already in operation. I commissioned some. We are not limiting it to that. We are engaged in a contractual deal with Huawei to develop a robust e-land border management system, if I want to qualify it, e-border land management system that inland border management system that will give us half, that will deal with close to half of the border surveillance and management system, which make it possible for us in Abuja to know at the place of button what is happening in Ilela or any of the borders that will be covered by that system.
And away from insecurity, the Kogi State National Assembly Election Petitions Tribunal has dismissed the petition filed by former senator representing Kogi West Senatorial District, Senator Dino Melai, for lacking in merit. Delivering judgment on the petition challenging the election of Senator Smart Adeyemi, a three-man panel led by Justice Issa Sambo unanimously affirmed Adeyemi's election as the winner of the disputed poll.
The courtroom is sparsely filled as supporters of Senator Smart Adeyemi await the verdict of the tribunal on the petition filed by Senator Dino Melai challenging his election into the Senate representing Kogi West Senatorial District. After over 4 hours, the tribunal came to the conclusion that both Senator Melai and his party failed to prove their claims and that the evidence of witnesses called by the petitioners was discredited during cross-examination. The Independent National Electoral Commission had declared Senator Adeyemi of the All Progressives Congress as the winner of the poll with 88,373 votes, while Senator Melai of the PDP came second with 62,133 votes. Senator Melai approached the tribunal with the hope of being declared the winner of the election or get an order directing a fresh election. Lawyer to the petitioner was unavailable for comments, but the lawyer to Senator Smart Adeyemi applauds the verdict.
After going through the records of witnesses that came before it and all the written address filed by counsels, found that the petition was not proved by credible witnesses and therefore dismissed the petition.
Reacting to the judgment, Senator Smart Adeyemi commends the tribunal for its position, while the petitioner insists the verdict is a miscarriage of justice.
What the judges have seen, Dino himself couldn't prove those allegations. He brought witnesses. Those witnesses said the election was free and fair.
I never expected justice at this level in the tribunal. I never expected justice. But I want to assure you that we are going to the Court of Appeal, and I believe by the grace of God we will get justice at the higher court.
He is vowing to appeal the judgment. This may just be the beginning of a legal battle over who represents Kogi West Senatorial District at the National Assembly.
That's all from here, but in our Lagos studio, Melinda Akinlami is standing by with stories from the world of business.
Many thanks, Ibrahim. Welcome to Business News. Nigeria will cut its crude oil supply by an additional 40 to 45,000 barrels per day next month to meet its compliance with the recent deal reached with the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies. The Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Mr. Mele Kyari, who mentioned this in a webinar today, explains that the cut will make up for its earlier overproduction in May by reducing 1.4 million barrels. He mentioned that Nigeria would have complied fully with the OPEC Plus output deal within the first half of July, while it aims to cap production costs at $10 per barrel by 2021 in order to remain competitive. The Senate has confirmed the new management of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is led by Mr. Lamido Yuguda as its new Director General, and the nominees for the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission as well. The Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, made the confirmation after considering a report by the Committee on Capital Market, which is chaired by Senator Ibikunle Amosu. The Senate also confirmed 5 out of the 6 nominees of the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission. The new appointees are Ms. Salamatu Bala, Mr. Alfred Egba, Mr. Adamu Dibal, Mr. Oladele Boyega, Mr. Bello Wamako, and Mr. Ahmed Yusuf. However, the Senate suspended the nomination of Mr. Emmanuel Wosu over an ongoing investigation filed against him. After a 2-day uptrend, the Nigerian stock market gives up some of its gains after profit-taking subdued some listed equities. Temple has details.
Thank you for joining us on the Stock Market Report. The stock market backtracked earlier gains recorded in the market by some 0.47% today, following persistent profit-taking on key counters. Now, this reduced the equity capitalization of the exchange by some 62.62 billion naira to 13.15 trillion naira. The industrial goods stocks ditched gains by 2.5% as a result of profit-taking on Boa Cement, but trading didn't end without some sense of bargain hunting, as seen in the market breadth, which closed flat. Now, CNI leasing topped the losers chart, while Beggar Paints gained the most ahead of tomorrow's markdown for dividend qualification. GT Bank was the largest contributor to the volume of transactions, which fell today marginally by 0.78% for a value of 3.18 billion naira. And that's the stock market report. I'm Temple Ashaju.
Many thanks, Temple. The world's leading stock market is still mostly negative today following extended profit-taking by investors and expectations on the next move from the Federal Reserves. Here are the closing numbers for Wednesday. That's Business News. It's back to you, Joma.
Thanks a lot, Melinda. Still ahead on the news at 10, George Floyd's brother asks Congress to stop the pain by ending the killing of African Americans. Plus more stories from our London studio in Around the World in 5. Do stay with us. Welcome back. The brother of George Floyd has asked the U.S. Congress to stop the pain of African Americans being brutalized by the police. A tearful brother addressed the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee, where he remembered his brother, George. Here's Simon Pusey with more international news in Around the World in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London for your international news around the world in 5. After 34 years of investigations, Swedish prosecutors say they have solved the mystery around the death of the former Prime Minister Olof Palme. According to prosecutors, the Prime Minister was killed by Stig Ekström, a graphic designer who died in 2000. Ekström has long been a suspect, known to have been present at the scene of the crime. He was repeatedly questioned by police, but at the time he was dismissed relatively quickly from the investigation. Prime Minister Palme was shot dead in central Stockholm after a visit to the cinema with his wife and son in 1986. Politicians and diplomats have paid tribute to Pierre Nkurunziza after the country's president died of a suspected heart attack. He was admitted to hospital on Saturday after feeling unwell. His condition improved, but on Monday he had a cardiac arrest and efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. The former leader of the opposition said his thoughts were with his family. Nkurunziza, who faced widespread accusations of political oppression during his 15 years in power, was due to step down in August. The chief executive of the fitness firm CrossFit has quit after causing offence with remarks about the death of George Floyd and the resulting protests. Greg Glassman has stepped down after athletes, gyms and sportswear firms cut ties with the brand after he admitted unintentionally hurting many of its members. His exit came on the day of Floyd's funeral in Texas. During a 4-hour service broadcast live on every major US television network from a church in Houston, family members, clergy and politicians gathered to celebrate Floyd's life. Taking to the stage to deliver the main eulogy, civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton called him an ordinary who grew up in a Houston housing project but left behind a legacy of greatness. After the funeral, a horse-drawn carriage took Floyd's body through streets lined with thousands of people. Derek Chauvin has since been charged with second-degree murder and 3 other officers with aiding and abetting his death. A statue of Robert Milligan, an 18th century slave trader, has been removed from its plinth outside a London museum. It comes after global anti-racism protests triggered a debate about how Britain commemorates its imperial past. Statues glorifying slave traders and colonialists have come into sharp focus in recent days as part of a broader movement inspired by the Black Lives Matter protests following the death of George Floyd. The city's mayor, Sadiq Khan, has ordered a review and street names across London. Colombian police have seized $265 million worth of cocaine packed in shipping containers in a Pacific port. 4.9 tons of the drug were seized in 2 different containers in what is being considered one of the most important ports of the Pacific coast. The operation represents the largest cocaine seizure in Colombia this year. The authorities did not disclose the owner of the drug. Ali Kushaib, one of the leaders who fought the conflict in Darfur in the early 2000s, has been arrested in the Central African Republic. Mr. Kushaib is now in the custody of the International Criminal Court. He is wanted on 50 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity, including murder, rape and torture. He's been on the run for more than 13 years. Almost 300,000 people were killed and 2.5 million displaced during the conflict. Israel's Supreme Court has ruled against a law that had retrospectively legalized about 4,000 settler homes built on privately owned land in the occupied West Bank. According to the previous law, settlers could remain on the land if they built there without prior knowledge of Palestinian ownership or if homes were built at the state's direction. The Israeli government is due to begin discussing the de facto annexation of the Jordan Valley in the West Bank on July the 1st. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, is celebrating his 99th birthday today. Buckingham Palace has released a new photograph of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh to mark the Duke's birthday. Prince Philip has been shielding at Windsor Castle with the Queen since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in the UK. It is the first public photo of the Duke since he was seen leaving a hospital in London on the 24th of December last year. And finally, researchers have used ground-penetrating radar to map an entire ancient Roman city, including a temple and a unique public monument. The technology was used at Falerii Novi, a walled city spanning 75 acres about 30 miles north of Rome. Falerii Novi was founded in 241 BC during the time of the Roman Republic and was inhabited until around 700 AD in the early Middle Ages. With a population of around 3,000 people, it boasted an unexpectedly elaborate public bath complex and market building, with at least 60 large houses. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel studios in Lagos.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Now let's just update you on activities in the run-up to the Edo governorship primaries. And the state governor, Godwin Obaseki, has returned to the National Secretariat of the ruling All Progressives Congress to be screened to participate in the June the 22nd governorship primary of the party. The governor had earlier in the day left the Secretariat after he could not be screened at that time. He, however, returned to the Secretariat around 8 p.m. for screening, accompanied by his associates. Before then, he raised an alarm about alleged attempts by the committee not to screen him. Take a look at some sports. Here's Olumide Macaulay.
Thank you, Ijama. Hello and welcome to Sports News. The Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports Development has set up a 13-man task force with a mandate to revive the National Stadium in Lagos after years of neglect. The task force, which is headed by the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry, Mr. Gabriel Aduda, is made up of members drawn from the Ministry, the organized private sector, and security agencies. In boxing, Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury have agreed terms for a 2-fight deal. The British rivals have been holding talks of an undisputed world heavyweight title fight and have trashed out initial terms for 2 blockbuster battles. With increasing calls to change rules restricting protests at Olympic Games, athletes will now get the chance to discuss and decide on how best to support core values in a dignified way. The International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach reveals that consultations between athletes groups around the world were underway. That's Sports News. Ijoma, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Olumide. And the main news again. Key stakeholders in the Nigerian polity today asked the House of Representatives to go back to the drawing board as lawmakers began public hearing on controversial infectious diseases bill. Also today, the death toll from the Borno terrorist attack rose to 87, but we could not show you the pictures of those who were killed because they were just too graphic. And the Edo State Governor, Godwin Obaseki, has expressed misgivings about getting justice after he returned to the National Secretariat of the ruling All Progressives Congress to be screened to participate in the June the 22nd governorship primary of the party. The governor has said he does not expect justice. And that's the news at 10 tonight. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm Ijoma Onyato. Stay safe and good night.